Hello and welcome to Fantasy Life Podcast. Fantastic show on tap talking about some negatives. That's right. Not all glass half full optimism today. We are going through some of the biggest problems, the biggest concerns with the biggest names in all of fantasy football. I'm your host, Ian Hart. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to be back and reunited with the gang. Dwain McFarland, Chris Allen. Fellas, saw you 2 weeks ago when I somehow find a woman to take the last name Hart. It's now I am back from Thailand, ready to talk some ball, but yeah, boys, good to be back. Dwain, how's it going?
Doing great, man. And, you did a good job, I have to say. Julia is awesome. She is just an awesome, awesome girl. She's got a great family. You got a great family. I enjoyed being at it, so appreciate you inviting me. And yeah, man, good to have you back.
Outkick the old coverage, as they might say.
You did.
Chris,
big time.
Chopping up on the dance floor a little bit, man. You got some moves.
I mean, hey man, I got to represent like whenever I get out there. But bro, like that was such a fun time. I'm still got my dog ears, like that we had from the service and all that. I mean, I had a blast. Dwayne and I were talking the show after your wedding and just commenting on the fact that the day after, that Monday, it was a little tough to get to work the day afterwards after imbibing for so long on Sunday evening. But no, man, I'm very happy for you, Julia. I mean, the whole fam. I mean, it was a ton of fun. But man, let's talk ball. We haven't seen you in 2 weeks, man. So what takes do you have for us?
Let's talk some ball, guys. We're going to make some enemies today. As I said in the beginning of the show, this is not a podcast if you want to hear good things about some players. No, guys, I know that's what everyone likes to do this time of the year. All of our drafts are going to be great. You see everyone's best ball team going on Twitter. And it's like, how are there already, thousands of winners out there? And it's only June. Not today. Let's get negative. I picked 9 names. We're going to go around the horn. And basically, one of us is going to pick each one, then go through, explain our case for why this player actually could bust. And then after that, the other two will, again, maybe explain things and we'll hopefully come to a conclusion. So with that said, guys, Dwayne, why don't you kick us off? What could go wrong for, just, I guess at this point, social media world-renowned columnists like CJ Stroud? What can go wrong with CJ Stroud in 2024, Dwayne?
Yeah, for Stroud, it was really interesting when I dug into it. Look, I don't want to say I hate the player, but I mean, there are ways that it could go wrong. And that was our assignment, is that we were supposed to really think about what those things are. And when you look at, one thing right off the bat, at an 8.2 yards per attempt average, that's really healthy. But it's hard to get overly concerned about that, guys, because when you look at the scheme that he plays in with Bobby Slowick, and then you're like, okay, well, what does Tua do when off the Mike McDaniel tree when he's got weapons? Oh, great. Oh, yeah, great. He throws for over 8 yards per attempt every single season. What does Brock Purdy do when he's surrounded by all these weapons playing in that same scheme? Well, he's also continuing to do that. So I think the bigger thing, though, is if Slowick decides to make this a more balanced offense, like what we've seen with even Miami, even though their pass rate over expectation, is decent, but they don't run with a ton of tempo. They don't run a ton of plays. And then when you look at the 49ers, they're more of a run balanced team in the old Madden playbook, and they don't have to run as many plays because they're very efficient. So I think there could be a potential downturn in volume. Like that would be one thing that I would look at, Ian, but I think that the efficiency I'm not that worried about. The biggest thing I saw was really the splits for CJ Stroud last season with and without Tank Dell. If you had him on the dropbacks without Tank Dell, 7.2 yards per attempt, that's the league average versus that 8.2, which is well above the league. But again, they brought in Stephon Diggs. So for some reason, Tank Dell's not able to play. You still most likely still have 2 good receivers on the field in Nico Collins as well as Stephon Diggs. Now, Diggs did have a downturn towards the second half of the season last year in his efficiency, but he was still earning targets, still doing the things that we would expect him to do. And he's not that old. So when I look at this, the bigger issue for me with CJ Stroud is not that there's this glaring thing that I'm looking at in his profile saying, oh my God, like what are we drafting this player here for? They could be a bust. The bigger issue is I just named to you 2 guys that are really similar. There's Tua, there's Brock Purdy. They're going multiple rounds later. Right now, you've got to draft CJ Stroud in round 5 of your fantasy draft. If you want to wait on Brock Purdy, you're getting him at pick 109. If you want to wait on Tua, you're getting him at pick 118. And that doesn't even include other names like Dak Prescott, guys that are really dependent on their passing yards and passing touchdowns to get most of their production. So that's the other challenge with CJ Stroud. You're drafting him right there in the same range of other quarterbacks that also offer elite upside as rushers outside of Patrick Mahomes. But Mahomes is still a plus versus CJ Stroud and what he had last year. Now, Stroud did come through with 3 rushing touchdowns. But to me, that's the biggest issue. When I look at him, I'm like, okay, is he really going to to truly outperform Brock Purdy and Tua by the amount of draft capital difference that there is, like he's going to have to turn into Patrick Mahomes. He needs to be the next guy that makes a team just say, you know what, we're going to throw the ball all the time. And no matter what, you're going to be a perennial top 3 quarterback. But we haven't seen that yet from him. So I think that really is the biggest issue. It's just the opportunity cost, knowing that you could wait a little bit longer in your drafts, probably get something similar to CJ Stroud, not as young, wasn't, blowing up as a rookie like he did, but we have other quarterbacks that have a chance to have really similar stat lines that are cheaper.
And that really is the problem with some of these just more pocket passing quarterbacks. Stroud can move. We've seen it. He can run, but doesn't make a habit of it. And guess what? That's perfectly fine for the Houston Texans offense. We saw what they did last year, but he only had 167 rushing yards last year. 2 years ago, Joe Burrow had 257. Stroud, we are just literally saying, okay, he is going to be the most productive, non-rushing heavy quarterback in all of fantasy. It could happen, but yeah, it's a damn steep price to find out when you can get guys like Tua and Brock Purdy so much later, as Dwain alluded to. So, Chris, again, the weapons are there, so I'm not putting it past them, but it just seems like if you are going to draft a quarterback inside the top 5, top 6 of their position, shouldn't they kind of have that Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen archetype?
Well, yeah, it's either that or they have the high-end pass rate over expectation, like to Dwayne's point, that the passing volume needs to be there for them. And the neutral passing rate, on early downs, like for the Texans, we know that that's going to be at the very least, closer to the league average than what we would expect from the guys that you were talking to earlier. But I would say the one thing that did seem like I could take as a positive for Houston is that they were passing a bit more once they got into the red zone. While that stat is a bit more volatile because you do have fewer samples to work with, the red zone pass rate over expectation for last season was in the top 10. So now if you do add in a guy like Stephon Diggs and you do have Tank Dell for the entire season, Nico Collins, insert pass catcher here, and at least the offense does lend itself to being a bit more pass first once they get into scoring position, which would then help a guy like CJ Stroud, because while he might not boogie as much once they get into the red zone, if he is throwing it to some of those pass catchers that we are drafting with super high-end draft capital, especially on Underdog right now, most of those guys, all 3 of the primary wide receivers are going before round 4 at this point. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to invest this much into them, we would hope at the very least the touchdowns are going to be there. And from what we saw last year for the Texans with Bobby Slowick, with CJ Stroud in command of the offense, that's at least that's at least what they were doing last year. So hopefully at least that portion of the offense stays the same. The rest is just kind of a projection at this point. But again, I do think that the arbitrage case is the one that's the big negative against him. I would just fall back and look at the Anthony Richardsons, Lamar Jacksons, the guys that can rush, because those are the guys that can break fantasy, and those give us more outs as fantasy managers. Whereas if I'm going to invest in a pocket passer, I'll look at Dak Prescott later. I'll look at Caleb Williams later. I'll look at insert pocket passer here versus trying to make that bet that CJ Stroud will continue on that tear of high-end efficiency that we saw throughout the 2023 season.
Again, to be clear, the purpose of this exercise is to be negative. So Dwayne got assigned CJ Stroud. He doesn't personally hate CJ Stroud. That said, guys, when we finish these players, let's actually, say if we go ahead and right now, as we record this on June 6th, agree with CJ Stroud and whoever else's ADP being too high. So everyone we're talking about is currently going inside the top 5 rounds. So with that said, CJ Stroud, QB5, pick 56 ADP at Underdog Fantasy. I do think that's too high. Dwayne, what say you?
Yeah, because I think he's at the top of a tier that has a lot of players in it that go later than him. But here's what I will say is if I start my draft with Nico Collins in round 2, I circle back around and grab Stephon Diggs in round 3. Then I'm just, I'm considering that a boost. I'm going to be more willing to go ahead and pay the tax on CJ Stroud because in best ball, I want to complete my stacks. I know in week 17, I'm trying to correlate to win a big tournament. So I think that the format you're playing in also does matter. If you're playing any kind of fantasy league where there is just so much at stake for some sort of a point race, over the final 3 weeks, or it's more like a best ball tournament in the last weekend, then I think, you got to give him the boost for the stacking. If I'm just playing in a true home league, me, 11 other dudes, I'm probably waiting. I'm probably not pulling the trigger on Stroud. Even if I've already got Nico Collins or Diggs, I'm going to wait and try to take someone else that I think offers very similar value. And I'm going to go ahead and try to take something that I don't think will be there later at a different position.
Chris, 3 for 3, too high on CJ Stroud?
too high. And I think the other portion of that, Dwayne, I think you and I talked about this, if not last week, the week beforehand, is that if you are trying to plan for him, we're just sticking straight to best ball, like best ball tournaments. If you are trying to complete that stack, trying to do that with Baltimore, man, you have to really plan that out beforehand, because it's not just the Houston guys that are going in the top 5 rounds. Like most of the primary guys outside of Dalton Schultz. And if you are like investing in Noah Brown and those rest of those guys, like you can go ahead and do that, like be my guest. But on the flip side, week 17 against the Ravens, Derrick Henry's going in the top 4 rounds. If you want to get Lamar Jackson, if you don't get CJ Stroud and you want to get the pass catchers, he's going in the top 5 rounds. Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews. I mean, all of the bringbacks like for that particular matchup are all going in the early rounds as well. So you really have to be like, once you sign up by drafting Nico Collins or Tank Dell or whatever, like you're almost immediately having to plan to get one of the guys that will be a part of that stack, or at least the correlation portion of it, almost immediately afterwards, which in other positions, or if you're investing in other teams, you might not have to be as at least as prepared to make that decision to create that correlation as early as possible if you're investing in other teams.
Love this exercise, but can't wait until Stroud throws 50 touchdowns this year, and then this gets thrown right back in our face in December. So
that's why he's going higher, Ian, is because he's young, and people think that the ceiling is still more unknown. I mean, and that he could just be that dude. I mean, he threw 23 touchdowns last year and was still great. I mean, it wouldn't surprise us if he threw 35. Like, it's not going to surprise us.
True.
No, it wouldn't surprise me. I just thought it was messed up that you gave Dwain, the guy that lives in Texas, like the Texans quarterback. I mean, there's like some regional.
No, Ian's just trying to avoid it because he's Ohio State and he can't be negative.
Right,
let's be honest.
We don't know I'm Ohio State, man.
Everybody knows you're Ohio State. I got a picture of a jersey from your wedding.
I'm wearing one right now. Yeah, I mean, so. All right, another quarterback that we need to break down that is going directly next to CJ Stroud. I think there's even more unanimous hype around him, at least in fantasy land. That's right, Anthony Richardson, sticking with, our continental bias here. Chris, I know you spent a lot of time in Indiana over the last few years. What say you about Anthony Richardson? Do you think that he is someone that maybe the fantasy community a little bit too high on?
Yeah, because like if you ask yourself the question, what could go wrong with Anthony Richardson? I mean, I don't know, life, his health, just him being a part of the offense. The fact that we only had 2 full games of seeing what he can do, like as a quarterback for the Colts. But let's look at it this way. I mean, again, small sample size. We got 2 full weeks of him being the guy, weeks 1 and 4. Like in those 2 weeks, if we just want to look at the passing portion for Anthony Richardson, 6th highest pressure to sack rate of any quarterback in those 2 weeks. Again, I recognize that it's 2 weeks, but that's not great. 25% pressure to sack ratio. I wouldn't really subscribe to a guy that is unable to avoid taking a sack, like when
something he was lauded for in college, which is interesting.
Yeah, not as elusive. A guy that was running like a 4.3 or whatever at the combine. No, not so great. All right, well, let's talk about his efficiency. He was about as efficient as in those 2 games as Mac Jones, about 15th, 16th in EPA per dropback. So not a name that I would want a quarterback that I'm investing early round pick in. 22nd in EPA per dropback, and that's in the intermediate areas of the field. So who are his 2 primary pass catchers? The guys who are going to probably catch like the most passes was that Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. 2 guys that typically operate in that area of the field. So, I mean, that's just the passing portion. From a rushing standpoint, we all say that he's going to be the next Jalen Hurts, next Lamar Jackson, insert like high-end rushing quarterback here. But with the samples, the data that we do have on him, he was forcing almost half the amount of missed tackles as both of those 2 guys. He was about as effective as a rusher as like Daniel Jones. Oof. So, I mean, if we're saying that he's going to be this guy as a rusher, we didn't see much of that last year. He actually got hurt doing it. We want to say he's going to be a better passer, but we didn't really see much of that either. And really the only addition that they provided him is a guy that's a field stretcher, and A.D. Mitchell, who, I mean, I can leave it to Dwain in order to say like what the data shows on him, but at least from an outside perimeter standpoint, sure, he can win downfield. And actually, Anthony Richardson did show some acumen in being able to be accurate and efficient on those deep ball passes. But overall, if the passing is mid, I would say, as the kids say, the rushing is something of a problem. We don't know if he's going to be capable of continuing to do that, especially if his play style pretty much got him injured last year. Why should we be pushing him into the early rounds? Why should we be looking at him as a guy that's making that bet as a guy that can break fantasy when the part of his game that's going to allow him to break fantasy is something that wound up breaking him? So I'm kind of out on Anthony Richardson in the early rounds.
Dwain, Anthony Richardson, including college, now has essentially played 15 full games, like college and NFL combined. That's it. That's what we're working with right now. So all that, talk last offseason about how raw he was and unproven as a passer still kind of persists, man. I mean, he was 45th among 49 QBs last season, a completion percentage over expected. That is bad. But as we know, Dwain, rushing tends to cure all those sort of, wounds in fantasy land. Could it be enough for Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I think it still can be. I get where Chris is coming from. I understand like why people would be concerned. The injury really is the biggest. If we're being negative, it's the injury concern. Yeah. He can absolutely just suck as a passer and still be a top 6 fantasy quarterback. I mean, he handled 18% of the design rushing attempts last year. That could be around 20%. If you look at what his scramble rate was, like it was one of the better ones, inside the guy had 23% of the carries inside the 5-yard line, only playing, in 2 full games. This is actually counting all the games he played against him. And we know there were 2 of those games that he didn't finish. So he probably would have been closer to, some of the other guys like Jalen Hurts and these guys that we know get a ton of the carries inside the 5, but still 23% is really good. So he's going to get his chance to score touchdowns. He just has to stay healthy. Like I was talking about, his scramble rate, it was at 5% last year. So, but again, that's games where he left like in the middle. So I think that's going to be like closer to 8 or 9%. So, he could throw for 3,000 yards and be the QB3. Like that's the problem with moving him too far down. I think the risk is definitely coming with the injuries, but I've kind of taken the approach with injuries like, man, I'm not good at predicting them. And I haven't really found anybody that is good at predicting them. I think we've come a long way and we've got some really good doctors that share a lot of really good data around these players. And I try to lean into that as much as I can. But for me, I think Anthony Richardson, the problem is once you get past him and you start thinking, what else can I get? What's the next player that I can get that's like him? It is Jaden Daniels. But after that, like you're done. Well, there's Kyler, right? There's Kyler and Jaden Daniels once you get past Anthony Richardson. So if you're not taking Richardson and you still want a chance to break fantasy with a rushing upside quarterback, you still have 2 more swings and they are cheaper. But again, the resources are just more limited. There's not that many dual threat quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson is one of them. And you could just see a scenario if he does go ham in the rushing game, like it might be one of the best rushing seasons we've ever seen. And so I'm still in. I want my exposure to Anthony Richardson where he's at. But I do agree with Chris that like the negative angle is the injuries.
And I'm happy you brought up the Jaden Daniels point, Dwayne, because again, that would be the argument. Like, well, I can just wait for Jaden Daniels. But again, one of my big lessons from last year was things where I would get so obsessed with the archetype. The why, buy this guy in the 3rd round, you can get this guy in the 6th round. That doesn't necessarily mean the guy in the 3rd round is mispriced. I don't think Anthony Richardson is mispriced. Dwayne, I think you hit the nail on the head. If that's an expression, I don't know. But when we look at Richardson, if he stays healthy, there's no way he's not going to finish in the top 5. So yes, the price is steep for a guy that only has 15 freaking collegiate and professional starts to his name. But when you can literally win your fantasy league with the guy, I'm going to take that risk. So Anthony Richardson, I am still buying at this cost. All 255 pounds of him, Chris. You also buying?
I'll buy. Yeah, I'll continue to buy because the upside. It's what's the question? I think Dwayne and we talked about this last week. Like, what do you win when you win? What do you win if you're right? And you can take down your entire league with a guy like
Chris.
Anthony.
You can't say you're still buying him. You just said you were out on him.
I can speak out of both sides of my mouth.
You just flipped really quick.
I know. Well, I would say that I agree with you guys' points, and I would say that I'm still buying. I'm being cognizant of the. I'm good. I'm adhering to the exercise. Damn it! All right, I'm gonna shake off the bit, and then I'm gonna say that yes, I'm still buying. But just on the outside, but on the note that when we were talking earlier about CJ Stroud and the amount of draft capital that you have to buy in, not just for him, but the Week 17 correlation, if you're thinking about it from a best ball standpoint. Who did the Colts play? The Giants in Week 17? I mean, you can pick up most of the pass catchers for like either team outside of Malik Neighbors in like the 2nd and 3rd round at pretty much whenever you want. So there isn't really much of a concern that you're going to miss out on either finishing your stack and or creating the correlation that you're going to need for best ball tournaments. So at least as compared to CJ Stroud, it's easier for me to see a case for building around a guy like Anthony Richardson at cost versus CJ Stroud. So that's the only thing I'll say is that like I will do that over CJ Stroud.
No, that's a great point. I've had a lot of lineups so far where I've taken Richardson, not even having Pittman. It's like, all right, great. I'm going to have a reasonable chance to get one, if not both, of Josh Downs and AD Mitchell just a bit here later. So done with QBs, guys. Now let's talk 2 of the top 3 RBs out there in fantasy. Kicking things off with everyone's favorite rising second year back. What could go wrong for Bijan Robinson in 2024? I am taking this one. So first off, when the fantasy community talks about Bijan, they act like this dude like barely surpassed 200 touches or something like that. Not that he had the 9th most combined carries and targets already last year. That happened. And guess what? He was really good with them, okay? No, he wasn't a top 1, top 3 RB that we hoped for. I remember the time when Arthur Smith didn't play him because he was sick on the field. And yes, Jonnu Smith got 1 carry inside the 5-yard line. That sucked. It happened, but it was 1 carry, guys, okay? The red zone stuff, you know what the bigger problem was? The offense fucking sucked. He had 8 total carries inside the 5-yard line all season. That was the 4th lowest in the NFL. So when you keep calling Bijan Robinson 2 carries inside the 5-yard line, it's like, yeah, I wish they would have had more as a team. Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't get too many carries inside the 5, but when Detroit has 30 of them to spare, guess what? All of a sudden he finds his way into a few when Montgomery gets tired. So now that that's off my chest. How good is Bijan Robinson really? Okay, because we're just already crowning him as this generational talent, one of the best talents in the entire NFL. And yeah, I think he's really good. He was 12th in, rushing yards above expectation last season. James Conner, Zach Moss, Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook, they were better. Just saying. That's the hat. That's the stat we want to hang our hat on. Pass catching, he's very good, right? I mean, pretty good. PFF says he's the 29th best receiving running back last year. ESPN says 36th. All right. Well, was he behind a bad offensive line? No. Falcons offensive line ranked 4th last year per PFF. Okay, so he's really good. Maybe not generational, but really good. All right. Are we positive with Arthur Smith gone, the usage is going to move in the right direction? Because, I don't know, Tyler Algier didn't die. We can hope that Zach Robinson's going to feature Bijan more than we wanted, but it's not a guarantee. And the one thing we do know is that Zach Robinson, at least during his time with the Rams with Sean McVay, didn't really like throwing to running backs. In fact, over the last 3 seasons, Falcons running backs ranked 13th in targets. Rams running backs ranked 31st. Vikings, Kirk Cousins, they were 28th. Could be less targets for Bijan. And we even have Bijan himself saying he's going to be more of a straightforward rusher this year and then doing everything else. Guys, in fantasy football land, we want targets over rush attempts. Final point, is this offense with 8-year-old Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles injury going to go from the 26th ranked scoring group to this top 10 unit that everyone seems to be crowning them as? So again, we are betting on Bijan as a top 3 running back in fantasy, being an extraordinary talent, just so much better than anyone else in the position, having his volume take a huge boom, hopefully in the passing game, even though that's not what anyone that's now joined the team has really done, the pass at running backs, and that Kirk Cousins is going to be A-okay, this top 10 quarterback that's going to easily lead a top 10 scoring offense, even though, yeah, hasn't exactly done that every step of his career. So I feel like I made some pretty compelling reasons there, Chris. Tell me why I'm right or wrong.
I think you're wrong in the sense that if we're still going to get a more efficient offense like out of the Falcons, then that's really all that we need. I can't see myself projecting or at least advocating for Tyler Algier to really take away like the money touches for a guy like Bijan Robinson. And if now you're telling me that this offense is going to be like not just more pass happy, but at least a bit more efficient. I mean, bringing Zach Robinson over from LA, you got Kirk Cousins who's familiar with the system. I mean, all that to say that if this offense is going to be more efficient, they're going to be running more plays, or at the very least, let's say running more plays once they get into scoring position. That should at least give Bijan Robinson the requisite touches to really push him into or to at least sustain that early round draft capital, that early round ADP. And so if that's going to be the case for him, then yeah, I'm still buying at this point, because I mean, what are we expecting here? Like for all that pass volume, is Darnell Mooney really going to find the fountain of youth? Not necessarily the fountain of youth, but what 5th, 6th year breakout for Darnell Mooney? I mean, are we really projecting Rondale Moore to kind of take over? If so, that's the case, then ADP is way off on either of those two guys. So at least for my money, if the passing volume is still going to be there for that entire offense, I should at least think that Bijan is going to get at least enough of it to keep him in the first round.
$39 million man, Darnell Mooney, to you, Chris. But I know, I agree. And as much as I would love to sit here and actually say, like, yeah, I'm out on Bijan. No, I'm in on Bijan Robinson. He's right now. Let's see.
Look at that. Now you're flip flopping. See, like he's not just me.
He's the 7th player overall going off the board right now, and I think that's exactly right. So, Dwayne, what say you? Even though, come on, give me some credit. I made some good points there.
You did make some good points.
Yeah, no, I'm all in on Bijan. I have no problem with him. He had a 17.5% target share last year. I mean, that's elite for a running back. If you look at the things that matter the most and are the most stable year over year for running backs, your targets per game is at 0.46 R squared. Your adjusted target share is 0.47. So those are two things that we really want to see. And now we also have in OTAs, they continue to talk him up, talking about using him in all facets of the game. And he is an every down player. And I think the offense is going to be a lot better. I think you can make an argument that Bijan could go as high as 3 in fantasy drafts. So I think he's a player that we want to be in on. Would it surprise me if he actually is the number 1 running back in all of fantasy, the number 1 fantasy weapon, period, all year? Like, I would not be surprised if Bijan is that. We don't get players like this that often that are so good in both facets of the game that are young and on the ascending track. And this year we happen to have another one we'll touch on a little bit later with Breece Hall, but Bijan is definitely one of those, and I want to draft him as much as I can. In fact, like, I draft him over Justin Jefferson like every time when I'm deciding between the two. Yep. I just feel like Bijan's got the higher ceiling, and I don't got to worry about a rookie quarterback.
2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns are fully on the table for
Bijan.
He
could break fantasy. Yes, Bijan can break fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he could. And for that reason, I'm in on Bijan, even though I said some pretty negative things there. So please, if you listen to this, Bijan, hopefully you got to this part. So Dwayne said it, though. We got another young running back to talk about that many are in on. That's right, the consensus RB3 in fantasy right now. Dwayne, what could go wrong for Breece Hall in the year 2024?
The biggest thing that could go wrong for Breece Hall is if you lose Aaron Rodgers again. You know, you've got an old quarterback coming off of an Achilles injury. This also goes for Garrett Wilson. But that's the biggest issue. The other potential issue for Breece Hall is just the fact that they have continued to throw draft capital, not early draft capital, but they've continued to throw draft capital at the running back position, even after getting Breece Hall 2 seasons ago. Last year, it was Israel Abanikanda. And then this year they come in and they take Braylon Allen, and then they get Isaiah Davis in the next round. So there's a little bit of a thought that maybe they want to keep the workload a little bit lighter on Breece Hall. And I mean, if you look at him last year in the games, you know, where he was healthy and played the full game, it was still good, though. Like, Breece Hall had 61% of the rush share, which 57% is the average for a running back 1 on an NFL team. So he was slightly above that, but he wasn't at the elite levels, right? He wasn't up there where Saquon was at 74%. You had Kyron Williams at 74%, Josh Jacobs at 79%. So he was a tier below those guys, but right in the tier with guys like Christian McCaffrey, who had 63% of the 49ers rushing attempts. 62% is where Jonathan Taylor was at. Bijan was at 45%. That's where it's just stupid, like what Arthur Smith was doing with Bijan. But looking at Breece Hall, what does he do? He offsets that, man. He is a great target earner. 16% target share last year, 5.3 targets per game, 27% targets per route run. And this isn't new, dude. He was great in the receiving game in his rookie season as well. So 2 years in a row, we've seen that he has the potential profile to be the next CMC. And that could happen this year. So I'm when I look at, you know, Breece Hall, the only negative I see is if for some reason Aaron Rodgers goes down again. And that could happen, whether it's the Achilles or not the Achilles. Like, Aaron Rodgers is getting older, right? So at some point we have to just admit that there's a little bit more of an injury risk with a quarterback like that than, you know, a guy that's younger. So that's the biggest thing. If you suddenly week 2 saw Aaron Rodgers go down, you know that, oh man, this is not good. This is bad for Breece Hall. We could have said the same thing, honestly, for Bijan, because he's got basically the same thing. A little bit of a younger quarterback, but Kirk Cousins also injured his Achilles. It was later in the season than Aaron Rodgers. So I think those are two potential negatives. But honestly, the upsides are just so many because they can win in every single way. And all of the offseason research that I've done, which is really around like which things are the most sticky and matter the most, Breece Hall, like, he checks all the boxes, man.
Mm-hmm. And I will say,
so I don't even know if that was negative. I just ended on
right. But I don't think you followed the exercise, Dwayne.
Well, he gave me Breece Hall.
Well, like,
how do I even? I don't even know. I was searching for something negative. The only thing I could do was point to his old quarterback.
Well, let's hope nothing negative happens, Dwayne, because we're going to come back to this moment and I remind you of it if it does. But now, the thing is, I think you're right, because like so many of the problems from last year can just be explained away pretty easy. You know, you have Rodgers. They actually did add a bunch of resources to what was a really bad offensive line. So when you look at the drop off in rushing from his rookie year last year, there's also the injury he was working his way back from. He had the limited first half usage going on. So honestly, for me, it would just be like the fact that Rodgers might not be as much of a check down merchant. I mean, you look at some of those late season games where, I mean, what they really did to Breece by the end of last season was almost criminal. It just didn't make any sense. The dude had 37 carries in a meaningless Week 18 game against the Patriots. And they actually pulled him out early because they wanted to get him over 1,000 rushing yards, because the NFL refuses to act like 1,000 total yards isn't the same damn thing. So, yeah, hopefully Breece Hall gets more than one carry the entire season from inside the 5-yard line this year. Give me that. And yeah, my original point, Dwayne, if Rodgers does go down, our one true tie god is backing up. So that's at least an upgrade over Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and all those other jokes that the Jets charted out over the last 2 seasons.
You know what's crazy about that one carry inside the 5? It was still 33% of the team.
Oh.
Yeah.
In the games he played, in any of the games, like I think he had one game he missed, didn't he? Or did he play all the games? I can't remember. Anyway, the 33%. So
let me throw one out there.
17 games. So that's in all the games. 30. They only had 3 carries inside the 5. Jesus.
Go ahead, Chris.
One potential negative, and you guys say yes or no whether or not it's going to be a thing or not. Does Nathaniel Hackett, being the potential, not even potential, the donkey that he is as a coordinator, want to try and turn 235-pound Braylon Allen into the short yardage back, and then he takes some stuff away from Breece Hall? He tries to do like the AJ Dillon thing that they tried to do when he was still in Green Bay.
They could try to do that. Yeah. That's why I mentioned like they've invested in these other running backs, and they took 2 this year. So if we suddenly get to week 1 and Breece is not, getting the full workload, and let's say he's at 55% of the rushing attempts, that's really going to hurt him, because then he's got to be hyper efficient, and he really needs to make sure he retains that passing down work. But when I look at the passing, tree, when I look at like Garrett Wilson, I know he's getting his, but Mike Williams coming off an injury, like we don't really know what he's going to be, and he's never been a huge target earner. So if he's the 2, and Malachi Corley right now, by all accounts, not just based on our data and research from the supermodel, but even what the coaches are telling us, like every week, it has to be all basically designed. So he's not going to be on the field all the time. And then you got Tyler Conklin. I still think there's a really good path for Breece Hall to be the number 2 target in this offense. At worst, probably the number 3.
I agree.
I will say Braylon Allen, I'm a little bit less concerned because he was a day 3 guy, and just a lot of the work we did in the offseason got not so great reviews on him actually as a prospect. So great story. Youngest player in the NFL. That's cool. Not ruling it out.
The AJ Dillon comp from Chris is great, because AJ Dillon looked like he should be a really good running back, but he's not. And they continue giving him carries, and Nathaniel Hackett was part of that. So I think that was a good one by Chris.
So we don't know for sure. Sometimes the 3rd round, I know Braylon was 4th round, but sometimes you get a 3rd round pick like Devin Achane, pick 84 last year, goes in, splits up the backfield, balls out. And then let's see, 5 picks later, who is that? Oh yeah, Tank Bigsby. How did that work out? Not good for my bankroll. That's how. All right, guys, before we keep going, basketball fans, the finals are off and running. We've seen it all this season. Rookies rising to the top, legends leaving their legacy on the court. Donovan Mitchell going off. Okay, I threw that one in there. And there are just a few games left to get on the action. Right now, you can get in on the action with DraftKings Pick 6, a brand new way to play daily fantasy sports. All new customers who play $5 will get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Getting started is simple. Just download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and sign up with our promo code QUESTIONS. Pick at least 2 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat, like will they score more or less than 30 points? I probably pick more. Why? It's more fun to root for freaking points. What kind of monster would root for less? Or have more or less than 8 assists? Once again, more. Lock them in and compete against others for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and sign up using our promo code QUESTIONS only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. All right, one more running back before we move on to some wide receivers that we're going to talk some absolute shit about. Let's talk a little about Jahmyr Gibbs, rising second-year running back on your Detroit Lions. RB4 off the board right now. You got to use a shiny round 1 pick. Maybe you get lucky. You can get him the first 2 picks of round 2 to get his services. So I believe this one is going to, I should be a much better host. Chris, this one to you, Jahmyr Gibbs?
I got it.
Go get him. What could go wrong?
I got it. What could go wrong? Jameson Williams could go wrong for Mr. Jahmyr Gibbs. Now let's think about it. Last season, Jahmyr Gibbs, 9th amongst all running backs in terms of target share, top 10 in targets per route run, just around like 4.7, just short of like 5 targets per game. So from a running back standpoint, that's great, and we love that. But we've heard nothing but good things about Jameson Williams and what could be like his breakout season coming up. Dan Campbell talking about him, saying he's like, that's a man on a mission. We're seeing all the clips out of OTAs, camp highlights of him, connecting and doing awesome stuff and like just being the guy that we'd all hoped that he was going to be coming out of college. And that's fine. But Jameson Williams last season throughout the entirety, despite the fact that when was it? Like around like week 12, week 13, we started to see him get more end arounds, like for that touchdown he scored, I believe, against the Saints in like week 13 against the Vikings. I mean, doing more JMO type stuff, the run after the catch and everything. Still only get 3.5 targets per game across the entirety of the season. So now if his stuff comes up, where else is that volume going to be taken away from? They're going to start taking away stuff from Amon-Ra St. Brown, the guy that they just paid a whole bunch of money to? I don't think so. I mean, are they going to start taking more stuff away from Sam LaPorta? I've got some stuff on him too later. So like potentially, but this is also a team that, and Ian, I think you pointed this out. This is also the same team that actually really doesn't have like any outdoor games until when is it? Like week 9, I think, is their first one, somewhere around there.
Yeah, and they have 2 or 3 total or something.
Right. And then they don't play outdoors again until like week 16, week 17, when they play like at Chicago and at San Francisco. And why does that matter? Well, like, hi, everybody. Chris Allen, FFWX on Twitter, the weather guy. That's me. So why does that matter? Because if they wind up having some of those outdoor games where we know Jared Goff and his small hands and his penchant for fumbling away the ball or throwing interceptions, once it does get colder out, where are they going to have to turn the ball to? I mean, they would have turned to the running game, but if they're not going to have those types of opportunities throughout most of the regular season, he might be slinging it. He might be throwing it to Jameson Williams and throwing it to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam LaPorta and continue even all the way down to like Khalif Raymond if you're into that type of thing. Last year's red zone pass rate over expectation for when they were at home, Detroit Lions. I mean, they were still negative 10%. Not great, but still we knew that we were going to take in, like, use David Montgomery and whatever. While they're on the road, especially in outdoor stadiums, minus 17%. So now if we're going to have less volume or like less chances for a guy like Jared Goff to fumble away the game with his small hands and whatnot because of the elements, that could affect a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. So I'm out. I'm hating. I'm out.
Chris just went to Jared Goff's small hands.
Yes. You went to Aaron Rodgers' Achilles.
I know. I'm just saying.
It's a little more relevant.
Ian
I had to do something.
It is a little more relevant, Chris. But to be fair, Ian did pick some really hard guys that he gave to us that we had to try to be negative about.
I had to stretch. I had to stretch for it.
See, my thing is, like, I don't know that you had to stretch. I do think there's some lower hanging fruit. Number one, he averaged 5.2 yards per carry last year. Can he do that again? Maybe. I mean, we have seen some backs do it. Jamal Charles, there have been guys that have come along that have been able to maintain that. But like that could come down. That could easily come down. He could be more like he could be at a 4.5 and still be well above the league average of 4.2 or 4.3 for running backs. So I think that's one thing that could come down. The other thing is a lot of his touchdowns came, from outside the 5-yard line. And if you look at most running backs, they get the majority of their scores from inside the 5. So if his yards per carry and explosive play rate, which can be, we know he's an explosive player, but that can be something that can be not super stable every year. So all of a sudden, he can be one of these guys that scores 11 rushing touchdowns in a season, and easily the next year could be at 5 just because he gets tackled at the 1 a few more times. So I feel like the biggest issue for me with Jahmyr Gibbs is the fact that David Montgomery played well last year, and they liked him in the role that he was in, and he's still there. So that most likely means Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have to be hyper efficient again, and that could be the challenge. That's the negative. But on the positive side, they could give him a larger role. Like they've already talked about potentially doing that. So I hear you on the JMO stuff, but and that could become a factor. But I think the bigger issue is, like, can he keep this efficiency up if they keep David Montgomery just as involved as he was last year, and if they continue to give David Montgomery all that work inside the 5-yard line? 35% of the rushing attempts inside the 5 last year went to Jahmyr Gibbs. Whenever you look at David Montgomery, he got 61%. So he's the guy that they did prefer there. And we know as much as touchdowns can be volatile, like they're a big part of scoring fantasy points. And that's how you get the big boom weeks. And the majority of those for all running backs come from inside the 5-yard line.
Maybe Gibbs has been feeling himself a little bit this offseason. Montgomery's all of a sudden not taking himself out inside the 5-yard line to give Gibbs some of those goal line carries anymore.
There were a couple of those for sure.
I know. You got to consider every variable, people. But I think the one thing with Gibbs, I'm not doubting his receiving ability, but we almost just act like he's already done so much as a receiver. Guys, he only scored the 18th most fantasy points from only receiving production last year. Ezekiel Elliott, Samaje Perine, Brian Robinson, Tajay Spears, Antonio Gibson, Jerome Ford, all of these guys had more fantasy points from receiving than Jahmyr Gibbs. 38 combined receiving yards for Jahmyr Gibbs over the final 6 weeks of the regular season. So it wasn't like something that, they just waited to get him going as a rookie. I mean, look, the Lions have an awesome offense, okay? Goff is throwing the ball a lot to the sun god, to Sam LaPorta, and maybe even Jameson Williams, but it really wasn't that much to Gibbs. Under 50 yards in all but 2 games the entire year. So honestly, it's tough for me to rank Gibbs all that low because, you just go through the running backs in the NFL and you're only going to find a couple that have those true workhorse roles. And guess what? That's why we couldn't really be overly down on Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. But with Gibbs, I mean, Dwain, when I go in drafts and I'm looking at between Gibbs and Garrett Wilson and Drake London and Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm usually taking the wide receiver there.
I click on the wide receiver a lot as well, but I'm with you. I want my exposure to Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't want to be underweight on him because if something happens to David Montgomery and you're in week 3 and David Montgomery goes down, you're like, oh, I didn't draft Jahmyr Gibbs.
Is that the same week he went down last season? Like, didn't he go down for a couple?
I don't know. It was week 2 that he went down last year, but you were close. But that would be a really sick feeling because we know that if that happened, Jahmyr Gibbs could be the running back 1. Like if we knew that David Montgomery was already gone from this team, let's be honest, Jahmyr Gibbs would be ranked in the same tier with Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. That's how we would feel about him. So the only difference is we know that David Montgomery's still hanging around, and that makes us have to, push him down a little bit. So I think the argument is, should Jahmyr Gibbs be going that close to Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall in drafts? You're talking about a guy going 4 to 5 picks after those guys. Like that doesn't feel right. But then when you look at, like you said, he and the rest of the running backs, like I'd still rather click on Jahmyr Gibbs than Saquon Barkley and Kyron Williams and Josh Jacobs. So like the price, I think the market's still right and where the price is on Jahmyr Gibbs. So I'm going to say no. He's not overpriced because it's just the way the market's working. I'm going to say yes, he's probably too close to Bijan and Breece Hall, but what are you going to do about it? Like, there's nothing you can do about it other than take the receivers quite often, like you mentioned. But Ian, I like getting Gibbs with one of those receivers too. Yeah. So I mix up the way I handle those best ball drafts.
And because they're priced at the turn, you usually have the chance to do exactly that. So, yeah. And honestly, this is one of those things where you said he could be the overall RB1 without Montgomery. That's not like a guess. That's what he was when Montgomery was actively injured last year. We have, sometimes it's tougher, projecting what teams could do with their handcuffed running backs. We saw it when Gibbs was out and Montgomery took over, and we saw vice versa. Detroit Lions, I believe they have been number 1 or number 2 expected backfield PPR points each of the past 3 seasons. It's the most fantasy-friendly offensive running backs in the entire NFL, and that's why he's being priced as the RB4 right now. Pretty much makes sense. All right, guys, I have a very special one for us. It's our DraftKings sponsored one. That's right, promo code questions. Again, remember, check out their new Pick 6 app. What could go wrong for reigning rookie freaking champion Puka Nacua in the year 2024? Your boy is taking this one. So I think what this one comes down to more than anything, I tried to look at Stafford and he's getting old and stuff. Well, kind of forgot that they actually brought in Jimmy Garoppolo as their backup. So wouldn't be ideal, but that's actually not, the worst backup quarterback you could actually wrap your mind around. Then I was like, okay, well, is Puka really that good? And I was like, am I really going to be the guy that brings up? He led the league in drops. I didn't do it with Deontay. I'm not going to do it with Puka. Not going to be me. So it comes down to one thing and one thing only. Is Puka Nacua the best wide receiver on the Los Angeles Rams? He was last year when Cooper Kupp was playing through a hamstring injury. But what happens if we actually get the Cooper Kupp who is healthy and was the PPR wide receiver 1 in the entire NFL for both 2021 and 2022 on a per game basis when he was healthy? What if he's back? Last year, 12 games together, even with Kupp at less than 100%, Puka had 100 targets, Kupp had 99. All right. We are giving Puka the A.J. Brown, the Tyreek Hill, the Ja'Marr Chase treatment over Devontae, Waddle, and Higgins after 1 year in which Kupp was mostly injured during it. So that's where it comes from me. Chris, Puka Nacua versus Cooper Kupp. In your heart of hearts, do you think if they're both healthy in week 1 that Stafford's still for sure going to Puka over Cooper? Because I'm not so sure.
No, I can't be sure about it either. The only thing that I think about with Cooper Kupp is the fact he caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl against my Bengals. I just keep going back to that. But no, I think your point is well taken. But also the other fact that this is still a team in the Rams that will continue to run like three wide receiver sets at the highest rate in the league. And beforehand, like when it was Cooper Kupp that was going off, and even through most of last year, when they were still trying out the Tutu Atwell experience, the Ben Skoranek experience, and whatever. I mean, they now have a legitimate third wide receiver in Demarcus Robinson. Now, whether or not like you want to think like, oh yeah, he's the dude that was like the sixth option for Patrick Mahomes when he was in KC, could barely get on the field when he was playing with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, and now we're expected to believe he's now going to be this like fantasy relevant type of guy. I mean, look at what Robinson was doing like down the stretch just this past season, and even into the playoffs. So now if like they have like a legit 3 wide receiver set, like moving into 2024, then I'm hard pressed to believe that right now for Puka, that volume is going to be there as it was like for last year. He's still going to get his, and he'll still be the wide receiver 1, like by role and by targets. But will they be as high? Like, will the highs be as high as some of the guys that are currently going around him? I say no. And then to your point, I mean, drafting Cooper Kupp at his price, I think seems to be a bit more, I would lean more towards that than taking Nacua at his cost.
Dwayne, I'm looking at the leaderboard last season, PPR points per game for wide receivers, and top 5 guys, CD, Tyreek, Keenan, Sun God, JJ, they're all over 20 points. Puka was 6th, but he was all the way down to 17.5. And we're talking about a difference between Puka and Jefferson. That's as big as, between Puka, and you can go all the way down to Tank Dell at wide receiver at 19. So there really was a drop off between, again, those big 5 to Puka. But now in fantasy, Puka is still number 6, but that drop off's not there in overall ADP.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it with Puka. I like where he's going. I think making the argument to Yell's point, like, should he really go over Garrett Wilson or AJ Brown? Like, I think people should be mixing those up, right? And if you're drafting 150 best ball teams, well, you're going to have so many times where you're at the pick, you get to do Puka, you're going to get to do AJ Brown, you're going to get to do Garrett Wilson. So I get the argument, like potentially against the other guys in the range, but I think he belongs in that range. Last year in the games with Puka and Kupp on the field together, Puka had a 29% target share and Kupp had a 27%. So to me, this is potentially more about Kupp being slightly underpriced versus Puka being overpriced. 29% target share, I'm good. And Demarcus Robinson, yeah, he was good down the stretch, but most of it came really from his points, as far as scoring touchdowns. If you look at the games where you have Puka and Kupp healthy, an 11% target share for Demarcus Robinson. So I think he's a nice third option. He's good for Stafford. He's still good at the end of drafts, but it's not enough to make me worry about Puka. Like, at this point, I know what Demarcus Robinson is. He's been around long enough, and he's not something that's going to make me lose sleep over Puka. So I like all the Rams, man. I like all the Rams. I like stacking them up with Cardinals in that range when I can. I'm all in on Puka. I'm drafting a lot of Cooper Kupp. I'm actually thankful that they're that far apart in ADP, so I have a chance to get both.
I have Puka a whopping 1 spot behind Dwayne in our Fantasy Life rankings that you can find at fantasylife.com, both overall and as a wide receiver. I would take AJ Brown ahead of him, but to Dwayne's point, mix them up. Yes, he's going to ball out. Because guess what? If Cooper Kupp is number 1, I don't think it's going to be Kupp 200 targets and Puka 100. It's just like, all right, yeah, maybe Puka finishes closer to wide receiver 12. Really think we are looking at a special.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to rate the chances that their teammate goes down, like, as much as we don't like trying to be in the predict injury business, like, we would give the better odds to Puka having a chance to have, more games with Kupp out versus Devonta Smith being out with AJ Brown. So, yeah. I mean, I think those are the slight little things that drafters get in their mind. And they also know that, I mean, Puka is the new shiny toy. So naturally, we've already talked about that with a couple of players. So just like why CJ Stroud is so much higher than other guys that are a similar archetype. So I like Puka where he's going, but if I had to pick, I'm just straight up receiver. I'm with you, Ian. I would take AJ Brown, but I'm fine drafting him where he goes.
Up next, we are on to another wide receiver. Rising third-year wide receiver. Talked about his offense a little bit before. Drake London. Dwain, I know he's been someone that you've been, very high on really ever since he came out. I remember actually talking about him with you as a prospect, and we stressed that, hey, just because you have a high contested target, rate percentage doesn't necessarily mean you can't separate. Drake London, now he's got Kirk Cousins throwing him the football, but because of that, he cost yourself a pretty penny in fantasy land. Dwain, what could go wrong with Drake London in 2024?
Yeah, the biggest thing that goes wrong is it's similar to what we talked about with Bijan. It's Kirk Cousins is not his same self coming across the Achilles. Like the big thing you're looking at with Drake London, we know the underlying talent profile is there, right? So his adjusted target share over his first two seasons, 27% and 21%. If you want to look at, targets per route run, 27%, 22%, yards per route run, which is actually honestly amazing to be at a 2.07 and a 1.87 whenever you had to suffer through Marcus freaking Mariota. You had to work with Taylor Heineke and then Desmond Ridder. Are you kidding me? To be anywhere near a 2 with because quarterbacks that impacts your yards per route run because it comes down to their accuracy and all sorts of other things that play into your yardage. So Drake London, we know, when you look at all those things, you add them up and you look at the historical data profiles of the underlying talent, he is right there as a borderline wide receiver 1. You could say high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. Right now where he's going in drafts, like people are treating him like a high-end wide receiver 2. So really the only thing, like I don't have any doubts about Drake London's talent profile. I think he's a good player. Last year I was on the record was saying, hey, Drake London, if he had played for the Jets and had Aaron Rodgers, now that didn't work out because he got hurt, like we would be drafting Drake London the same way we would have been drafting Garrett Wilson, last year.
Here we are.
Drafts. And here we are. Now we have Kirk Cousins. So it did come full circle. So now this really needs to work out because I'm already on the record saying that. But I'm really confident in it, man. Like if you go back and you look at this, if you look at the history of situations like this, we had one of the worst passing offenses in the league over the last 2 years. Like, can you guys really think of one that you just really for sure say was worse than the Falcons over the last 2 years, passing offense?
Jets, but yeah, I hear you.
Panthers.
And even then, and no, the Panthers were not worse over the last 2 years.
Oh, the last 2 years. I'm thinking 2023 alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of one.
Yeah. I mean, it was bad. It was really bad.
Yes.
And so whenever you look at what's happened for these type of players that pick up, if we look at where the Falcons were last year and we look at what's happening with their quarterback room, now here's the nice thing for them. At least they did draft Michael Penix. And if for some reason Kirk Cousins isn't what we think, there's a better safety blanket than what was there before. Now we don't know for sure. Penix could just come out and be a rookie, and rookies have a tendency to at times just, completely bomb. So, that could also happen. But when you look at these yard swings, and I'm expecting 50 to 75 yards more per game passing in the way I've got this team projected, I'm going to give you the guys that have seen that over history. Eric Decker got that when Peyton Manning came to the Broncos. Guess how many fantasy points more he scored per game? 7.3 that year. Then we had T.Y. Hilton, the year that he lost Andrew Luck to injury, and he had to go with Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett was a rookie or a second-year player that year. I think a second-year player they had traded for him. The Patriots ended up trading for Brissett. I can't remember which way it was. But anyway, it was the opposite. Yeah. So Jacoby Brissett was the starting quarterback. Then Andrew Luck comes back healthy. T.Y. Hilton goes up 6 fantasy points per game. And so I could keep on going on. There's more of these guys. But when you look at these talented players and they suddenly get this bump in passing yardage, so if we're saying somewhere between 40 and 70 yards per game, so on average, you've had 62% of those guys went up in fantasy points, okay? And on average, it's been somewhere between 1.5 and 2 fantasy points per game. So I know you're looking at Drake London, you're like, well, he needs more than that, to be, a high-end wide receiver too. So there is a little bit of a stretch here. But the biggest issue would be if Kirk Cousins is not back to it, because that's how I'm getting Drake London to where he's at. He has the right talent profile, but I am assuming that Kirk Cousins is going to be near what we had already seen from Kirk Cousins over the last 3 years. So if there's something I'm doing in the projection process that's the most shaky about this, maybe it is being that confident that Kirk Cousins will really be what he has been and that he won't start off slow or anything like that. I'm not docking them anything. I'm assuming that this is going to be a 260 plus yard per game passing offense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and honestly, I'll go ahead and nip one of the potential issues in the bud right now. Like this is the number one wide receiver on the Falcons, right? Kyle Pitts is not better than Drake London. Maybe if Kyle Pitts can get back to being fully healthy and actually progressing as a player, that'll be great. But as much as everyone wants to complain about Jonnu Smith eating the Kyle Pitts workload last year, I'm sorry about your fantasy team, but Jonnu Smith was objectively making more out of his opportunities than Pitts. Pitts was coming back from multi-ligament knee injury that we didn't know was multi-ligament, and that was unfortunate. But look, I just watched all of Kyle Pitts' targets yesterday, okay? There was not, 5 a game that were just flying over his head as he's wide open downfield. So Mooney, Rondale Moore, okay? Clear compliments to your alpha number 1 on the outside, who is Drake London. And mentioned before the contested catch thing, and that has followed him to the NFL. But what you can see when you look at, again, the wide receivers with the highest percentage of contested catches over the past 2 seasons, it's the quarterbacks, but you also see some true ballers in there. So yes, Devontae Parker, Alec Pierce, Michael Gallup, DJ Chark, Gross. Yeah, I agree. DK Metcalf, Mike Williams, Cortland Sutton, T. Higgins, Alan Lazard, Drake London, and George Pickens. Which group does Drake London fall in? I'm pretty sure it's the good one. So yeah. I'm buying. Chris, are you?
Yeah, I'm buying, because I think it's a similar argument to kind of like what we were talking about with the Jahmyr Gibbs thing. And the parallel is that you're trying to project a massive role shift, or even just like an uptick in production from another player that's currently on the roster. Like, we're saying that Jameson Williams is going to come in and be this like new player and like this high end wide receiver that everybody expects him to be, to take away from Jahmyr Gibbs. And it's kind of the same thing that we're saying about Kyle Pitts. It's like, could he challenge Drake London for targets? He absolutely could. He has an athletic profile to do so, but can he actually do it? And we haven't seen that to be the case. So it's kind of like a projection or a leap to say that that's what's going to happen for Pitts in 2024. And then, of course, by extension, then adversely affecting a guy like Drake London. So no, I'm buying London where he's currently at right now.
Well, and the other thing is, even if Kyle Pitts does that, it's going to be a condensed offense. It's going to be the two of them. They could both.
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts can still destroy his ADP guys, and it doesn't mean that if he does that, Drake London's going to be bad. I think this is going to be a very condensed offense. It's going to be about the guy we already talked about. Bijan Robinson is going to get the most touches. Drake London's going to be second, and Kyle Pitts is going to be third, and you're going to be happy with all of them in fantasy football. And I don't know what I'm talking about, because I'm supposed to be talking about what I hate. And so, like, I've failed at this assignment. That's all I can say.
Again, couldn't deal with Drake London. My top 5 drafted wide receivers right now over Underdog Fantasy. Still early in the offseason, but Chris Olave, Brian Thomas Jr., Jermaine Burton, George Pickens, and then Mr. Drake London. So what could go wrong with that group? All right, we got 2 tight ends to talk about before we get on out of here. Now it's time for your turn on the hot seat, Chris Allen. Let's get negative. What could go wrong with reigning overall, not per game, overall tight end 1, Sam LaPorta?
He drops a touchdown or 2. I mean, that's basically all he needed to do to not be the tight end 1 last season. I mean, the man caught 10 touchdowns. Everybody else just caught, I think the highest everybody else caught was 6. And it's really all that matters, like for him to not be the tight end 1 for 2024. I mean, out of all the tight ends that like we care about, from Travis Kelce down to like Evan Ingram, if you want to include him in like that high end list, or the early round guys that you're going to be drafting. I mean, Evan Ingram had the most targets out of all of them. Evan Ingram had 143 targets like throughout the course of the regular season last year. LaPorta was down at 120. George Kittle was like the only tight end last year to eclipse like 1,000 receiving yards last year. Or LaPorta didn't even cross like 900. So it's like, if he's going to be the guy in the red zone, because there's not going to be a ton more we can't really expect more from Amon-Ra St. Brown. We talked about the limitations for Jameson Williams, or what we were projecting him to be. Then it's like, I can easily see a situation where LaPorta doesn't catch the touchdowns that he had last year. And then we're just kind of looking at it where he's still going to be a good a good pass catcher for Detroit. He's still going to get the target volume, because there isn't going to be a ton of target competition for him compared to Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, any of the ancillary players for Detroit. But again, relative to the rest of the field, where we can already see Travis Kelce getting more targets, Evan Ingram getting more targets, George Kittle like still having more yards than most of them, because the yards after the catch ability for him in San Francisco. Yeah, I could see a case. It's pretty easy to see how LaPorta really doesn't reach the same heights as he did back in 2023.
Dwain, do you consider him kind of to be touchdown dependent? Because I will say, when you look at, again, the top five tight ends, I mean, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, even Dalton Kincaid, I mean, I think there's a much easier path to almost assume they're going to be their offense's number one. And nobody's expecting LaPorta to take over the Sun Gods. So number two in Detroit, enough to be a number one tight end?
Yeah, I think it still is, but I think, his point is valid about the touchdowns, and we can argue that about a lot of the different tight ends. It's such every position, tight end. I mean, touchdowns are part of the variance, but I don't worry about Sam LaPorta's profile. I mean, if you look at him, 23% targets per route run, 22% target share. This dude had a 26% target per route run versus man. That's the number one tight end of all of freaking football. Like, this guy is an absolute beast. My bigger issue with Sam LaPorta is the fact that I got to take him in round 3. And I love the value of the tight ends in round 4 and 5. And what happens is I take LaPorta and I'm fine with it. Like, I'll get him past ADP. And then I turn around in round 4 and I'm like, man, the best pick on the board here is really Trey McBride. I don't want to do double tight end every time. I will do, the bully tight end strategy occasionally. But the other problem is the tight end and quarterback combos that are in round 4 and 5 that you can stack. You can stack Mahomes with Kelce sometimes if you get lucky. That one takes a little bit of work, but you can often, like, if you take Sam LaPorta, say you're picking from the 4th spot, and in the 3rd round, you take Sam LaPorta at that round 3, pick 4, I'll guarantee you're going to come back and be going, well, damn it, Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews are here. And I could have just stacked both of those guys, but I've already got a tight end on my roster. So Dalton Kincaid also going in round 4. If you take Josh Allen in the middle of round 3, you can get Kincaid in the middle of round 4 if you reach a little, or you try to wait and see if he comes back to you in round 5. And so when I take LaPorta, that stuff's all off the table. And I think that's tight end quarterback alley. I think quarterbacks and tight ends are the most valuable picks in rounds 4 and 5. And when I take LaPorta in round 3, it just kind of messes me up a little bit. So I still get him because I want exposure. I like him. I don't see myself being overexposure to LaPorta because I do think he's slightly mispriced versus the other guys with McBride, with Kelce, with Andrews. I'm fine if you want to rank him the number one out of that group, but let's be clear, that is a group, and it won't surprise me if any one of them finish at the top.
7 picks ahead of Kelce, 15 ahead of McBride, 20 ahead of Kincaid and Mark Andrews.
That's a lot, man. Especially versus Andrews, who we've seen do it.
What is wild, though, like, I just looked this up. Lions tight ends in 2022 scored more touchdowns than Lions tight ends in 2023. They're just now all going to LaPorta. It was Brock Wright, Shane Zylstra, Hawkinson had a couple before he got traded. James Mitchell had one. Like, you watch Lions games, and we'll see Brock Wright get a couple again this year. I mean, the things they do to scheme up their tight ends in the red zone. I mean, they have their great trick plays and everything. I know their special teams, my God, the punt team is unbelievable with that. But truly, like, some of the best work that Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell do. Should be no surprise given Dan Campbell's past as a tight end. He hooks up his position group when they get down near the end zone, and you love to see it if you are a Sam LaPorta fantasy manager. So I'm not buying as much because of Dwayne's point. Again, overall rank, but if you want to rank him at tight end 1, yes. But to Dwayne's point, certainly in that group. Fellas, final one more tight end, rising 3rd-year talent. I'm going to take the reins on this one. What could go wrong for Trey McBride in the year 2024? And I'm going to say it right now. I think he's overpriced. I do not think he should be the overall tight end 3. And this is not a bit, all right? I'm breaking the 4th wall here. Yeah, Trey McBride is overpriced in Fantasyland right now because guess what? All these things are true. He could not beat out Zach Ertz last year until he got injured. That happened. New coaching staff, 2nd year should be a clean slate. Trey McBride, the first 7 weeks of last season, had 15 catches for 170 yards and 0 touchdowns. 21 targets. Wasn't even being used in the offense, all right? Okay, fine. 2nd year tight end, whatever. He couldn't beat out a veteran. Remember that, Ben Sinnett, you freaking crazy hive people out there. Remember that. Okay, whatever. What's he do? He goes out there, he works as the, tight end 1 the rest of the season. That was cool, I admit, okay? What was the competition? The one guy playing ahead of him was hurt. Marquise Brown spent more weeks on the injury report than anyone else out there and wasn't even available for the final few weeks of the season. I will never say a mean thing about Greg Dortch. I'm just not going to do it. Rondale Moore and people were out there. All right, there was not much target competition going on. So what have the Cardinals done? Yeah, 4th overall pick, Marvin Harrison Jr. But I think even more importantly, a guy that's been completely ignored is 82nd overall pick, 3rd rounder, Illinois tight end Tip Raymond. Peter Schrager's favorite prospect in the entire draft. And apparently Peter Schrager is the most plugged in NFL insider in the entire freaking world. So maybe that means something. And yes, I've been told and shouted at by the Twitter hive already when I dared float this take out there that yes, Tip Raymond is probably more of a block first tight end. I don't know, guys. Use a top 82 pick on a block first tight end. Maybe you want to get him out there on the field. And guess what? 2 tight end sets don't really come to fruition all that much in the NFL. So, no, I don't think Raymond is going to come out here and take McBride's job. But, Dawson Knox is a block first tight end too. And go ahead and look at how Kincaid splits look when he's on and off the field. So that could make a difference. And I'm not even willing to say this dude is only a block first tight end. His RAS score, guys, 9.93 out of 10. Even if you don't know what a RAS score is, that is the 10th highest athletic score among 1,100 tight ends charted since 1987, all right? This dude is an athletic freak. Dane Brugler says he's a scrappy blocker with dependable pass-catching hands. I am not putting past the idea that, again, a third-round tight end could actually go ahead and eat into a little bit of Trey McBride's workload, which could be devastating. Reminder, offensive coordinator Drew Petzing not only picked Ertz over McBride last year, but the 3 years before that, he was in Cleveland playing freaking Russian roulette with their tight ends. Austin Hooper got the bag, and it didn't matter. He still rotated with David Njoku and Harrison Bryant, and it pissed us all off in fantasy land for a good 3 years there. So that was all annoying. And then finally, when we watched Trey McBride, I don't blame people for not grinding Cardinals games last year, but were we watching him like, my God, this is a legit top 3, top 5 talent in the NFL? I don't really think so. Last 2 years, 49 qualified tight ends. He's 10th in targets per route run. Chigozie Okonkwo's higher. 1.51 yards per route run. That's tied with Jonnu Smith. 95 passer rating when targeted. 33rd among 49 qualified tight ends. This seems to me like one of the traps that we fall into every single year where a good player puts up great numbers on a sunken team at the end of the season with no other places to go with the football because someone is hurt and the team is just dead in the water. Dwain, tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, one, I don't care what Peter Schrager says. Trey McBride was a far better tight end prospect for fantasy purposes.
No.
Not to say Peter Schrager doesn't know what he's talking about.
No. He just meant Raymond this year was his favorite prospect, completely independent of McBride.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why. Unless he just likes people that aren't going to do a lot when they get to the NFL. Because I'm definitely betting against Tip Raymond being anything based on the supermodel, based on all the things we've seen that matter for collegiate profile, RAS score not being one of them. It just doesn't correlate strongly to future success. It's better for tight ends than it is for other positions, but speed score is still the thing that matters the most. And so, yeah, Tip Raymond, he came out and he tested well. It was not a strong target earner in college. It's a 3rd round pick. Would it surprise me at all if they drafted him just to be a blocker? In this offense, no, because I think Drew Petzing does want someone to come out and take some of the rundown work away from Trey McBride. We see that quite often in this style of an offense. And that can hurt Ian. That could keep him to more like a 70-75% route participation instead of being a guy that has a shot to be at 85%. If you can get to 80%, that's great. 75% is okay. 85% is elite. And so I do think there's a little bit of risk in it. I think it's more systemic of the kind of offense that they want to run. If they're in games where they're not trailing and they're not having to throw the ball all the time, I think there could be a little bit of risk for Trey McBride, but it's just hard for me to think that he's going to be anything less than the number 1 or 2 target, on this offense. It won't surprise me if he gets more targets than Marvin Harrison Jr. I've got it projected the other way. I've got Marvin Harrison Jr. as the number 1 guy, but Trey McBride had 26% targets per route run last year, and he was already starting to take over that starting role away from Zach Ertz. He was one of the guys we got a new tool coming. I'm not going to spill it all too, but we're going to have a trends tool and utilization that is there to design to tell you about players like Rashee Rice, Trey McBride, and basically say, hey, look, their role's expanding. It's not a full-time role yet, but with the role they have, they're doing really well. And Trey McBride was on that list. He was one of those guys that over the 2 games, even before the injury to Zach Ertz, his route participation was up and they were getting more and more involved. So I think there was also a potential natural transition that was already happening. And the Ertz injury just made it quicker. It definitely sped it up. It might have taken another 5 to 6 weeks for that to happen with Ertz there, but I think it was still coming, for Trey McBride. So I like him. I'm still taking him in round 4. I think, arguing whether you should take him over Mark Andrews and some of these other guys, I agree with you. But again, it's a tier. Like there's a tier of guys, and it won't surprise me at all if McBride's number one. It won't surprise me if LaPorta's number one. It won't surprise me if Mark Andrews number one. I think the argument that you can make is like, hey guys, we've seen Mark Andrews do this for multiple years now. Do we really? Then if you take other context of everything you just said and like saying, okay, we had half a season versus this other guy that we've seen do it for multiple seasons at a really high level, probably on an offense that we like a little better than the Cardinals, maybe a lot better. So I think there's definitely, there's arguments to should Trey McBride be going ahead of some of those other tight ends in the same tier, but I'm not scared of him. He's not a guy that I'm worried about. And I've drafted an elite tight end on almost 70% of my teams and 60% if you make the cutoff Dalton Kincaid. I went ahead and included Kyle Pitts in there just so I can make people mad and call him an elite tight end. Oh yeah, I had George Kittle in there as well. So when I make the cutoff George Kittle and Kyle Pitts, about 70% of my teams have a tight end that goes by then. If I tighten it up and I take it down to Dalton Kincaid, which is basically a round sooner than the rest of those guys, 60% of the time I have a tight end. So I have plenty of Trey McBride. I've got LaPorta. I've got Mark Andrews. I've got Travis Kelce. I've been mixing them all in.
You see, it's really fun for me to go through my spiel first instead of being like, it's ridiculous he's tight end 3. He should be my tight end 5. All right. It doesn't really roll off the tongue the same way, but that's right. Like, yes, I agree. It's hard to actually objectively rank him lower. I think tight end, if you want to do Kyle Pitts ahead of him, I think you can. Like, but you can't put Ingram or Kittle or those guys really.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of hard even with Pitts just because the brightest shine we've seen from McBride has been brighter than the brightest shine we've seen from Pitts, and neither one of them has had a long period. They've both had, look, Kyle Pitts, when you put it all together, his profile looks good over his first 3 years. So you can obviously say he's got the longer track record, but as far as like burning hot for any period of time, like, man, Trey McBride, that was really good what we got at the end of last year. He was a league winner. If you picked up Trey McBride off of your waiver wire and you get to plug him in and you added him to a team that was already good and now he became your tight end 1, you were feeling pretty good about life.
Yeah. I am hopeful that McBride gets a little closer to that tight end 5. He was going after Mark Andrews. Yeah, I'm not even bringing him up on this show, but right now I do think he is a bit too high. Chris, take us out.
No, I think that's it. If you just swap Trey McBride's ADP with Mark Andrews, I think we're all good after that. And the fact that like McBride's like his targets per route run still held like after Kyler Murray came back. It wasn't like over the full season we saw like, what was it? Like Josh Dobbs and the rest of those guys, and he had chemistry with them. And then when Kyler Murray came back, there was a dip. No, like he was holding like all of his metrics like throughout the entirety of the season. So I'm kind of with Dwain on this one where it's like, I'll take him at cost. He hasn't been like the highest priority for me because I have been looking more for like Mark Andrews at cost and some of the guys that we've had seen do it more. And they have shown like brighter, like over longer stretches of time. But for where he's priced right now, it's like, if he just slides just a little bit farther down, I'm all in.
All in. And guys, we are done being all in on the negative side of things. At least for now. I thought this was a useful.
We weren't very
exercise.
Negative, but we tried.
We weren't.
I
mean, I'm talking about like week 16, week 17 weather to like disparage. I mean, like there's not much you can do, man.
Oh my goodness. Dwain, anything else you will get off your chest before we get going?
No, man. No, I think I've already chewed up more than my fair share of the mic today. I've gone too long, so I'm good.
Chris, is there anything cool this weekend?
Actually, yeah, going to on a distillery tour with our brethren,
nice.
Lord Reeves and Mr. Daigle. Yeah, so we'll be grabbing some whiskey like down in Kentucky like over the weekend. So it should be a good time. But no, if anything, I just want to say we're happy you're back. If we had more time, we'll have to get some Thailand stories like out of you, like another time. But yeah, man, just glad.
We're gonna have to heckle Mr. Harditz. We've got our stories we've got to break out at some point.
I know.
Chris, I didn't realize you were on that trip. Reeves hit me up saying he's in Columbus right now, and that's why I want to go out. Sadly, I got sick on the end of my honeymoon. I'm feeling better now, but the docs got me on some steroids. I'm trying to get my Barry Bonds on, so I'm allegedly contagious. I'm alone in my office. It's okay, everyone. But yeah, until Monday. So I can't drink beer and I can't hang out with Reeves for 5 freaking days. Not the best little homecoming, but you know what? Feeling good. Health is wealth, and I'm back with my boys. So how could that be a bad time? So great chopping up with you guys again. Great being back to you listeners. Thank you so much to everyone who sent me some kind words on Twitter and everywhere else. Really appreciate you guys. You help make all this possible. So for Dwain, for Chris, for producer James, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in to the Fantasy Life Podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.